Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive straight into this. We're looking at a truly foundational starting point for Canadian history today, pathways to the New World, the first migrations. It's an incredibly concise phrase, right? But it literally frames the absolute genesis of human history on this continent. So let's get right into it. Why did the first peoples migrate to the Americas? Just let that sink in for a second. We're essentially looking at a grand historical cold case here. It's not just your basic who or when, it is the ultimate why. Think about it. What actually drives human beings to leave absolutely everything they know, brave freezing, completely brutal ice age elements, and just step into total terra incognita? I mean, come on, most of us complain when the GPS takes us on a 5-minute detour, right? These early peoples were navigating a literal blank map. It's an incredibly striking question, and it lives as the gateway to understanding all early habitation.
Now, what's really interesting to isolate here is that word pathways. Notice that it's plural. We aren't just talking about one monolithic group taking a single straightforward walk across a land bridge. No way. That single S at the end implies this sprawling, complex web of multiple routes. It suggests wildly varied survival strategies. Maybe they were doing some coastal boat hopping along ancient kelp highways, combined with grueling overland treks right through narrow, ice-free corridors. It represents these incredibly complex decisions made by isolated groups over thousands and thousands of years. It tells us right off the bat that this wasn't just a one-and-done event, but a continuous, unfolding rhythm of human movement.
And so, where did all these diverse pathways actually lead? Well, to the destination historically framed as the New World. Now, obviously, the landmass itself wasn't actually new at all, right? It was incredibly ancient, complete with its own massive megafauna and deeply established ecosystems. But historically speaking, for the ink we were looking at, it represents a pristine, completely untouched frontier for human habitation. Entering this territory marks a dramatic, permanent shift in human geography. It is, arguably, the greatest geographic expansion of our entire species. Then, we have to lean into the concept of the first migrations. And I want to echo that phrasing for a second, the first. It connects directly back to this fundamental human drive to understand our origins. Before modern settlements, before any recorded historical eras, there was this primal, foundational movement. It takes a really unique blend of desperate survival and profound curiosity to be the absolute first to do something of this massive scale. You really have to wonder, did they know they were pioneering a whole new world, or were they just following the next herd of mammoth over the horizon? And this brilliantly illustrates a real tension in scale. Think about the massive contrast here. On one hand, we have the Americas, this absolutely enormous multi-hemisphere macro-level destination stretching almost from pole to pole. Yet the specific historical lens we're applying here is Canadian history, a much more focused micro-level inquiry. It's a brilliant juxtaposition, because you really cannot fully grasp the localized story of the Canadian landmass without first wrestling with the staggering vastness of the migration to the Americas as a whole. The big picture is what gives meaning to that specific geography. Let's move forward and see how this builds conceptually. When you break it down, the framework here is incredibly efficient. You have the overarching theme of the first migrations. Then you have the context, which grounds us specifically in Canadian history. And then you have the engine driving the entire thing, the why. It is a completely robust framework for serious historical investigation, constructed from just a handful of core concepts. It perfectly sets the boundaries for what we're trying to discover, ensuring we don't just get totally lost in the sheer volume of prehistoric data, but rather stay hyper-focused on human intent. So the crucial point is, if we deconstruct the literal anatomy of this prompt, it's almost like establishing the plot of an epic story. We have our subjects, the first peoples. We have the action, migrating. And we have the destination and the regional lens setting the stage. Every single vital element of a gripping narrative is right here. It's not just a sterile timeline of carbon-dated artifacts, It's a story about human agency. It forces us to look at history not as something that just passively happened to people, but as a series of conscious, immensely difficult choices to just keep moving forward into uncharted territory. Which brings us directly back to that foundational mystery. Why did they migrate? We have the actors, we know about the sprawling routes, and we know the final destination. But the true motivation? Was it escaping rapid climate shifts? Were they following depleted food sources, fleeing conflict? Or was it simply an insatiable human curiosity to see what exactly lay beyond the ice? It remains the ultimate cold case. So the next time you look at a map of the Americas, ask yourself, what exactly would it take for you to take that very first step into the frozen unknown? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning.